The last thing I heard before the machines went quiet was my own daughter telling Dr. Harrison to let me die. "Let her pass," Madison whispered, her voice carrying that practiced sweetness she'd perfected over 47 years. "We're not paying for surgery that might not even work." That's when I learned that love, like money, apparently has a spending limit. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Now, let me tell you how a 72-year-old grandmother ended up fighting for her life while her only child planned my funeral. It started 6 months earlier, when Madison introduced me to her new boyfriend, Derek Chen. And yes, before you ask, I should have known something was wrong when a 45-year-old man with perfectly straight teeth was suddenly interested in my recently divorced daughter. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning. My name is Eleanor Whitman, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had raised a decent human being. I lived comfortably in my late husband Frank's house in Westchester County, surrounded by 40 years of memories and a bank account that Frank's insurance money and smart investments had grown to a respectable $30 million. Not bad for a retired school principal and a man who sold office supplies, but Frank always said I was the brains of the operation. Madison had been struggling since her divorce from Tom. The settlement hadn't been kind to her. Apparently, judges don't look favorably on wives who empty joint accounts to fund shopping sprees in Paris. She'd moved back to New York from California, broke and bitter, with a story about Tom's financial abuse that never quite added up when you looked at the credit card statements. I welcomed her home naturally. She was my daughter, my only child, and despite her flaws, I believed families should support each other. I bought her a small apartment downtown, helped her get back on her feet, and even gave her a job managing some of my smaller investments. Nothing too complicated. I'm not stupid enough to hand over everything to someone whose financial planning involves buying shoes to improve her mood. Then Derek entered the picture. Derek was charming in that practiced way that should have raised red flags. He listened intently when Madison complained about her life, nodded sympathetically when she explained how unfairly she'd been treated, and somehow always knew exactly what to say to make her feel like the victim in every situation. He drove a leased BMW, wore expensive suits, and claimed to work in financial consulting, which, as I learned later, was code for professional manipulator. Within 3 months, they were talking about marriage. Within 4 months, Derek was asking thoughtful questions about my estate planning. Within 5 months, Madison was suggesting I update my will to simplify things when I died. I might be old, but I wasn't born yesterday. That's when I did something that probably saved my life, though I didn't know it at the time. I hired a private investigator named Janet Murphy to do a background check on Derek. Janet was a former police detective who specialized in financial crimes, and she found some interesting facts about my daughter's new boyfriend. Derek Chen wasn't a financial consultant. He was a convicted con artist who specialized in romance scams targeting older women and their families. His real name was Derek Morrison, and he'd been released from federal prison just 8 months before meeting Madison. His method was always the same: find a middle-aged woman with a wealthy parent, wine and dine her, then manipulate her into helping him access the family money. But here's the thing that really caught my attention. Madison wasn't his victim. She was his partner. Janet had photos of them together from weeks before Madison claimed to have met him, bank records showing she'd been paying his rent while spinning me stories about how generous and independent he was. Phone records proving they'd been in contact for months before their supposed first date. My own daughter had recruited a professional criminal to help her steal my money. I sat in my study that evening, looking at Janet's report, and felt something I'd never experienced before. The particular kind of betrayal that comes when the person you love most in the world proves they see you as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. The smart thing would have been to confront them immediately, cut Madison off, expose Derek, protect myself legally. But I've always been curious about just how far people will go when they think they're getting away with something. So I decided to play along and see what they were really planning. That decision almost killed me. Literally. Playing dumb at 72 turns out to be surprisingly easy when people already assume you're senile. Madison and Derek thought they were masterfully manipulating me, when really I was documenting every lie, recording every conversation, and building a case that would eventually destroy them both. Though I'll admit, there were moments when their audacity was almost impressive. Like the evening Derek suggested I might benefit from a financial review of my portfolio. We were sitting in my living room, Madison on the antique sofa that had belonged to my grandmother, Derek in Frank's old leather chair, and me pretending to be a naive widow, grateful for their concern. "Eleanor," Derek said, using that patronizing tone people reserve for children and the elderly, "I've been looking at some of the investments Madison mentioned, and I'm concerned you might not be getting the best returns." I sipped my tea and tried to look confused. "Oh my, really? Frank always handled these things. I'm afraid I don't understand much about money matters." Madison jumped in with practiced sincerity. "Mom, Derek has helped so many clients optimize their portfolios. Maybe we could arrange for him to take a look at your accounts, just to make sure everything's properly structured." What they didn't know was that I had 2 phones, my regular iPhone that they could see, and a second phone hidden in my purse that was recording everything. I'd learned this trick from Janet Murphy, who said evidence was everything in cases like these. "Well," I said slowly, "I suppose that would be helpful. But wouldn't that be expensive? I'd hate to impose—" Derek waved his hand dismissively. "Family doesn't charge family, Eleanor. I'd be happy to help as a favor to Madison." How generous of him, considering he was planning to steal everything I owned. Over the following weeks, I played the part of the trusting mother while they slowly revealed their plan. Derek would review my investments and recommend transferring everything into accounts he controlled, supposedly for better management. Madison would be given power of attorney to handle the transfers while I recovered from what Derek casually referred to as the stress of financial decision-making. The plan was actually quite sophisticated. They'd researched elder financial abuse laws and knew exactly how to make their theft look like legitimate financial planning. Derek even had forged credentials from several investment firms. Janet had verified that none of them were real companies. But the truly chilling part came during a conversation I overheard when they thought I was napping in the next room. "How long do you think before she starts asking questions?" Madison asked. "Doesn't matter," Derek replied. "Once we have power of attorney and the accounts transferred, she can ask all the questions she wants. Who's going to believe a confused old woman over a licensed financial advisor and her devoted daughter? And if she tries to fight it legally?" Derek's laugh was cold. "Eleanor, my dear, by the time she realizes what's happened, you'll have medical documentation of her declining mental state. Dr. Patterson owes me a favor from when I helped him with his recreational pharmaceutical habits. One evaluation claiming she's developing dementia, and any legal challenge becomes impossible." I lay perfectly still on the couch, processing what I'd just heard. They weren't just planning to steal my money. They were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent if I tried to stop them. Derek had a corrupt doctor ready to falsify medical records, and Madison was apparently fine with destroying her own mother's reputation and autonomy for $30 million. That night, I called Janet Murphy. "Eleanor, you need to go to the police immediately," she said after I played her the recording. "Not yet," I told her. "I want to see how far they'll actually go. This is dangerous. If Derek realizes you're on to them, he won't. I'm just a confused old lady. Remember, but Janet, I need you to do something else for me. I want you to find out everything about Derek's previous victims, every woman he's targeted, every family he's destroyed. I want to know his entire pattern." Janet was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor, what are you planning?" "Justice," I said simply, "and maybe a little bit of revenge." The research Janet provided was horrifying. Derek had targeted 17 families over the past decade, stealing an estimated $12 million in total. His victims ranged from a 90-year-old woman in Florida who lost her entire life savings, to a 65-year-old man in Texas whose daughter had helped Derek drain his retirement accounts. 2 of his victims had died during the legal battles to recover their money. But here's what Derek didn't know. I wasn't some isolated old woman with no one to protect me. I had Janet, I had $30 million, and I had something Derek's previous victims didn't have. Advance warning. I spent the next month setting my own trap. I opened new accounts at 3 different banks, transferring most of my money into trusts that Madison and Derek couldn't access, even with power of attorney. I hired a second private investigator to follow Derek and document his other activities. I even consulted with an FBI agent Janet knew who specialized in elder abuse cases. Everything was going perfectly until the morning I made a simple mistake that nearly cost me everything. I forgot to hide my second phone when Madison stopped by unexpectedly. Madison's eyes locked onto the recording phone sitting on my kitchen counter like a hawk spotting prey. For a split second, her perfectly practiced smile faltered, and I saw something cold and calculating flash across her face, something that reminded me uncomfortably of her father when he'd been caught in one of his rare lies. "Mom," she said slowly, picking up the phone. "What's this?" Now, I could have admitted everything right then. Could have confronted her with the evidence, called Janet Murphy, ended the whole charade. But something stubborn in my nature wanted to see just how good a liar my own daughter had become. "Oh, that old thing," I said, bustling around the kitchen like I was flustered. Derek suggested I record myself reading my grocery lists so I wouldn't forget items at the store. Something about memory exercises for seniors. I watched Madison's face carefully. For just a moment, relief flickered in her eyes. Relief that her scam might still be safe. Then she smiled that bright fake smile I was beginning to recognize as her manipulating mother expression. "That's so thoughtful of Derek," she said, though her fingers were already going through the phone's recent recordings. "He really cares about your well-being." Yes, I thought. He cares so much he's planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. What Madison found on that phone was 3 weeks of grocery list recordings, because I'd actually been making them, just in case. What she didn't find was any evidence of my real investigation, because I'd learned from Janet Murphy to never keep all my evidence in one place. But her suspicion had been aroused, and over the next few days, I noticed changes in their behavior. Derek started showing up at my house unannounced, claiming he was just checking on me. Madison began asking pointed questions about my daily routines, my phone calls, my appointments. They were watching me more carefully now, looking for signs that their mark might be smarter than they'd assumed. That's when Derek suggested the trip to Albany. "Eleanor," he said during one of their visits, "Madison and I have been talking, and we think you might benefit from a consultation with a specialist I know. Dr. Patterson runs a clinic that focuses on cognitive health for seniors." I felt my blood run cold, remembering the conversation I'd overheard about Dr. Patterson and his willingness to falsify medical records. But I kept my expression pleasantly confused. "Cognitive health?" I asked. "What does that mean?" Madison leaned forward with fake concern. "Mom, we've noticed you seem a little forgetful lately, misplacing things, repeating stories. We just want to make sure everything's okay." This was rich, coming from someone who'd forgotten my birthday 3 years running until her inheritance was on the line. "I don't feel forgetful," I said truthfully. "That's the thing about memory issues," Derek said with practiced sympathy. "People often don't realize when they're developing. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just part of aging. Dr. Patterson can run some simple tests, maybe recommend some medications or exercises to help." "Simple tests that would declare me mentally incompetent, you mean?" "Well," I said slowly, "if you think it's necessary." They booked the appointment for the following Thursday. That gave me 3 days to prepare for what I now realized was going to be their first serious attempt to gain legal control over my life and finances. I called Janet Murphy immediately. "Eleanor, you cannot go to that appointment," she said firmly. "If this Dr. Patterson is corrupt, he could create medical records that would be nearly impossible to challenge legally." "What if I recorded the entire consultation?" "Audio recordings aren't admissible in court if the other party doesn't consent. And even if they were, proving medical malpractice is incredibly difficult." I sat in my study, looking at the family photos on my mantel. Madison as a little girl, gap-toothed and grinning. Madison graduating high school as valedictorian. Madison on her wedding day, beautiful and hopeful before her life took the wrong turns that led her to this moment. When did my bright, accomplished daughter become someone who would destroy her own mother for money? "Janet," I said finally, "what would you do if this was your daughter?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I'd probably do exactly what you're thinking of doing. But Eleanor, the risks. The risk is that they succeed, and I spend whatever years I have left in some facility while they steal everything Frank worked for. That's not acceptable." That night, I made the decision that almost killed me. I was going to let them take me to Dr. Patterson, but I was going to be prepared for whatever they had planned. I contacted the FBI agent Janet had recommended, a woman named Agent Sarah Kellerman who specialized in elder fraud cases. She agreed to monitor the situation and intervene if necessary. I also did something that would later prove crucial. I recorded a video statement explaining everything I'd discovered about Madison and Derek's plan, including the evidence Janet had gathered. I uploaded it to a secure cloud account and gave Janet instructions to release it if anything happened to me. What I didn't anticipate was how far Derek was willing to go when he realized his usual methods weren't working. The morning of the appointment, Madison arrived early to drive me to Albany. She seemed nervous, chattering more than usual about inconsequential things. Derek met us at the clinic, and that's when I knew something was seriously wrong. Dr. Patterson wasn't just corrupt, he was terrified. I could see it in the way his hands shook, the way he avoided eye contact, the way he kept glancing at Derek like he was waiting for permission to breathe. "Mrs. Whitman," he said, "thank you for coming in today. I understand you've been experiencing some memory difficulties." "I haven't." "Actually," I said clearly, "my daughter and her boyfriend seem to think I have, but I feel quite sharp." Derek and Madison exchanged a look. Then Derek smiled. "Eleanor, this is exactly what we were talking about. You don't remember our conversation yesterday about your confusion with the grocery lists?" Except we hadn't had any such conversation. He was lying, creating a narrative on the spot for Dr. Patterson's benefit. That's when I realized they weren't just planning to have me declared incompetent. They were planning to do it that day, in that room, whether I cooperated or not. Dr. Patterson's so-called cognitive evaluation was about as legitimate as Derek's financial credentials. He spent 45 minutes asking me questions designed to make me sound confused, interrupting my coherent answers, and taking notes that I was certain bore no resemblance to what I was actually saying. "Mrs. Whitman, can you tell me what year it is?" he asked. "It's 2023, I replied. He scribbled something and frowned. "And who is the current president?" "Joe Biden." More scribbling, more frowning. I watched Derek and Madison sitting in the corner, both of them trying to look concerned while barely concealing their satisfaction. "Now, Mrs. Whitman," Dr. Patterson continued, "your daughter tells me you've been having trouble managing your finances, forgetting to pay bills, making unusual purchases. I hadn't forgotten a bill payment in 30 years, and my most unusual purchase recently had been a new bird feeder for the backyard." "I haven't had any financial difficulties," I said clearly. Derek interrupted. "Eleanor, remember last week when you couldn't find your checkbook? You were very upset about it." This was news to me, since I hadn't seen Derek the previous week and my checkbook was sitting in my purse at that very moment. Dr. Patterson nodded sagely. Memory gaps like that are quite common in early-stage dementia. That's when I understood the full scope of their plan. They weren't just going to declare me incompetent based on a fake examination. They were creating a fictional medical history of cognitive decline, complete with incidents that had never happened and symptoms I'd never displayed. "Doctor," I said carefully, "I'd like to see the notes you're taking." His pen stopped moving. "That's not necessary, Mrs. Whitman. These are just preliminary observations. I have a right to see my own medical records." Derek stood up smoothly. "Eleanor, let's not make this difficult. Dr. Patterson is trying to help." Something in his tone sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't the charming manipulator anymore. This was someone who was done pretending and ready to use force if necessary. "I'd like to leave now," I said, reaching for my purse. Madison's hand landed on my shoulder, pressing down hard enough to keep me in my seat. "Mom, please. You're getting agitated. That's part of the problem we're trying to address." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. The Madison I'd raised would never have physically restrained me against my will. This woman wearing her face was someone I didn't recognize. "Let me go," I said quietly. "Mrs. Whitman," Dr. Patterson said, "I'm going to recommend that you be admitted for observation, just for a few days, to run some more comprehensive tests." Observation. In a facility where Derek could control who saw me, who I could call, what happened to me. That's when I played the only card I had left. "Doctor, before you make any decisions about my mental capacity, I think you should know that this entire conversation is being recorded." The room went dead silent. Derek's charming mask slipped completely, revealing something ugly underneath. "Eleanor, what are you talking about?" Madison asked, but her voice was shaky now. "Janet Murphy, my private investigator, is listening to everything through my hearing aid, which has been upgraded with some very sophisticated surveillance technology." This was a complete lie. My hearing was fine and I didn't own a hearing aid, but they didn't know that. "She's also been investigating Derek's criminal background and documenting your plan to steal my money." Derek's face went white. Dr. Patterson looked like he might be sick. "Furthermore," I continued, enjoying myself more than I probably should have, "FBI agent Sarah Kellerman is aware of this meeting and will be very interested to learn about your medical license, Dr. Patterson, and your apparent willingness to falsify competency evaluations for money." Madison released my shoulder like I'd burned her. "Mom, you're being paranoid. No one's trying to hurt you." "Madison, honey, I have photos of you and Derek together from 2 months before you claimed to meet him. I have financial records of you paying his rent. I have recordings of you discussing how to manipulate me. And I have a detailed report on Derek's 17 previous victims." Derek was backing toward the door now, his composure completely shattered. Dr. Patterson was frantically shuffling papers like he could make his notes disappear through sheer willpower. "The only question now," I said, standing up and straightening my coat, "is whether you're going to admit what you've been planning, or whether I'm going to let the FBI sort it out for you." That's when Derek made the decision that changed everything. Instead of running, instead of trying to talk his way out of it, instead of any rational response to being caught, he grabbed the heavy glass paperweight from Dr. Patterson's desk and swung it at my head. I saw it coming and tried to dodge, but 72-year-old reflexes aren't what they used to be. The paperweight caught me on the temple, and the world exploded into stars and pain and darkness. The last thing I heard before losing consciousness was Madison screaming, not in horror at what Derek had done, but in fury that their plan was falling apart. When I woke up 3 days later in Albany Medical Center, a nurse told me I'd suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. My daughter had been very concerned about my condition, she said. Madison had been asking lots of questions about my prognosis and whether I was likely to recover fully. But what the nurse didn't know was that Madison wasn't asking those questions out of concern for my well-being. She was asking because she needed to know whether I'd remember what happened in Dr. Patterson's office. The brain injury was worse than I initially realized. 3 days of lost memories, another 2 days of confusion and dizziness, and periods where I couldn't remember simple words or recognize faces. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I was genuinely scared that Derek might have succeeded in damaging my mind permanently. But the human brain is more resilient than people realize, and so am I. By the end of my first week in the hospital, my memory was returning in pieces. I remembered Derek swinging the paperweight. I remembered Madison's reaction. And I remembered something else. The sound of a phone recording everything that happened right before Derek attacked me. Because there actually had been a recording device in that room, just not where I'd claimed it was. Janet Murphy had given me a small digital recorder hidden in what looked like an ordinary pen. I'd been carrying it to every meeting with Madison and Derek for weeks, and it had been running throughout the entire encounter with Dr. Patterson. The recording that could prove attempted murder, medical fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse was sitting in my purse, which the hospital had stored in a security locker. If Madison and Derek realized the evidence existed, they'd find a way to make it disappear. If they didn't know about it, I could use it to destroy them both. But first, I had to survive whatever they were planning next. Madison visited every day, playing the role of devoted daughter with Academy Award-worthy performance. She brought flowers, held my hand, spoke in hushed tones to doctors about my tragic accident. Derek, wisely, had made himself scarce, but I knew he wasn't far away. "Mom, I'm so sorry this happened," Madison said during one visit, her eyes filling with perfectly timed tears. "Dr. Patterson said you became very agitated during the consultation and hit your head on his desk when you collapsed. He's devastated that his office wasn't better equipped to handle medical emergencies." That was the official story. Then, no mention of Derek, no mention of the paperweight, just a confused old woman who hurt herself during a medical episode. "I don't remember falling," I said carefully, testing to see how much truth I could reveal. Madison's grip on my hand tightened slightly. "The doctor said memory loss is common with this type of injury. You might never remember what happened right before the fall. How convenient for them." "Madison, I said slowly. "Where's Derek? I'd like to thank him for getting me help so quickly." For just a second, her mask slipped. "Derek had to go back to the city for work, but he sends his regards and hopes you recover quickly. He was running." The question was whether Madison was smart enough to run with him, or whether she was going to stick around and try to salvage their plan. Over the next few days, I watched Madison carefully, looking for signs of what she intended to do next. She was nervous, constantly checking her phone, jumping every time a doctor or nurse entered the room. She was also asking a lot of questions about my medical care, my insurance coverage, and my treatment options. That's when I overheard the conversation that told me everything I needed to know. Madison was in the hallway talking to someone on her phone, thinking I was asleep. The hospital room doors weren't soundproof, and her voice carried clearly. "No, Derek, I'm not leaving. This is still salvageable. She doesn't remember anything about the office. The doctors confirmed the memory loss. I know it's risky, but $30 million is worth the risk. We stick to the original plan. She has documented brain trauma now, which actually makes the incompetency claim stronger. No, you idiot. You can't just disappear. If you run now, it looks suspicious. We need to see this through." My own daughter was planning to use my brain injury, the brain injury her boyfriend had caused, to have me declared legally incompetent so they could steal my inheritance. I had heard of evil in abstract terms, read about it in newspapers, seen it in movies, but I had never experienced the particular horror of realizing that someone you love sees your suffering as an opportunity. That night, I made a decision that required every ounce of strength I had left. I was going to let Madison think her plan was working, while secretly building a case that would not only send her to prison, but ensure she faced the harshest possible consequences for what she'd done. The next morning, I called Janet Murphy from the hospital phone, making sure Madison wasn't in the room. "Eleanor, thank God," Janet said. "I've been trying to reach you for days. The hospital wouldn't give me information since I'm not family. Janet, I need you to listen carefully. I have evidence of what Derek and Madison did, but I'm going to need your help to use it properly." "What kind of evidence?" "Audio recording of the entire encounter, including Derek assaulting me and Madison helping to cover it up." Janet was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor, why haven't you given this to the police already?" "Because I want to make sure Derek doesn't have time to flee the state, and I want to catch Madison in the act of trying to exploit my brain injury. I want them both to face the maximum possible consequences for what they've done." "That's dangerous. If Madison realizes you remember more than you're letting on, then I guess I'll have to be a better actress than she is." What I didn't tell Janet was that I'd already set another plan in motion. The pen recorder wasn't the only evidence I'd gathered over the past few months. I had financial records, photographs, recorded phone calls, and detailed documentation of Derek's criminal history. But most importantly, I had changed my will 3 weeks before Derek attacked me. Madison was about to discover that her inheritance had vanished, not because of her crimes, but because I'd quietly donated everything to a foundation that helped elderly victims of financial abuse. Every dollar she thought she was stealing had already been given away to help people exactly like me. The only question now was whether I could survive long enough to see the look on her face when she found out. Because Madison had one more card to play, and it was the most dangerous one of all. 3 days later, she brought Dr. Patterson's report to the hospital, along with a legal petition to have me declared mentally incompetent. But she had no idea that I'd been discharged 6 hours earlier, and I'd taken the recording device with me. I spent my first night of freedom in a hotel room in downtown Albany, surrounded by copies of evidence that would destroy Madison and Derek's lives. Janet Murphy had done exceptional work: financial records, surveillance photos, criminal background checks, and most importantly, that pen recording of Derek attacking me while Madison watched. But the real surprise was waiting in my email inbox. Dr. Patterson, it turned out, had decided that prison orange wasn't his color. He'd sent me a detailed confession admitting to his role in Derek's scheme, complete with documentation of the forged medical evaluation and a list of other elderly patients he'd helped Derek victimize over the years. Apparently, fear of federal prosecution makes people remarkably honest. I sat on the hotel bed, reading his confession and almost laughing at the irony. Madison thought she was so clever, partnering with a professional con artist. She had no idea that professional criminals always have backup plans. And those backup plans usually involve betraying their partners the moment things go wrong. Derek hadn't fled the state. He was sitting in the Albany County Jail, arrested 6 hours after attacking me on charges of assault, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Dr. Patterson had given him up immediately when the FBI showed up at his clinic. Madison still didn't know any of this. She thought Derek was hiding out somewhere while she handled the Eleanor situation alone. She was about to get a very unpleasant surprise. My phone rang at exactly 8:02 a.m. Madison's name appeared on the screen, right on schedule. "Mom?" Her voice was frantic. "Mom, where are you? The hospital said you were discharged, but that's impossible. You have a traumatic brain injury. You can't just leave." "Hello, Madison," I said calmly. "I'm feeling much better. Thank you for asking. But Mom, you need medical supervision. The doctors said you might have memory problems, confusion, difficulty making decisions. How convenient that would have been for her incompetency petition. My memory is perfectly fine, dear. In fact, it's remarkably clear. I remember everything about what happened in Dr. Patterson's office." The silence on the other end lasted so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. "Mom," Madison said finally, her voice carefully controlled, "you're confused. You fell and hit your head during a medical consultation. Derek wasn't even there." "Madison, sweetheart, Derek is in jail. Dr. Patterson confessed to everything, and I have a recording of Derek attacking me while you stood there and let it happen." Another silence. Then Madison's voice returned, but now it sounded different, cold, calculating, desperate. "No one will believe that. You have a documented brain injury. Any lawyer will say your memory is unreliable, that you're confused and paranoid." "You're probably right," I said pleasantly. "That's why I also have financial records of you paying Derek's rent before you supposedly met him. Phone records proving you'd been in contact for months. Surveillance photos of you together planning this whole scheme. And documentation of Derek's 17 previous victims. That's..." Madison started, then stopped. "Illegal? Yes, it is. Highly illegal. The FBI is very interested in elder abuse cases, especially ones involving organized criminal conspiracy." I could hear her breathing, probably trying to figure out her next move. "Mom, please, let's meet somewhere and talk about this. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." "Oh, there's been a misunderstanding, all right. You misunderstood who you were dealing with." I hung up and immediately called Agent Sarah Kellerman. "Eleanor, are you safe?" she asked as soon as she answered. "For now. But Madison is getting desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things. We've been monitoring her phone calls since Derek's arrest. She's made 3 calls to criminal defense attorneys and 2 calls to someone named Vincent Morrison." "Who's Vincent Morrison?" "Derek's brother. Also a convicted felon, also specializes in financial crimes. Eleanor, we think Madison might be planning something drastic." That afternoon, I got my answer about just how drastic Madison was willing to get. She showed up at my hotel with 2 men I didn't recognize. The front desk called my room to announce visitors, and I watched from my window as Madison paced in the parking lot, gesturing angrily at her companions. One of the men was obviously Vincent Morrison. He had Derek's build and the same cold eyes. The other was younger, probably hired muscle. Janet Murphy had warned me this might happen. When sophisticated criminal schemes fall apart, the criminals often resort to more direct methods. I called Agent Kellerman immediately. "They're here," I said. "Madison and 2 men, probably planning to force me to recant my statement or sign over power of attorney. We're 10 minutes away. Can you get to a public area? The hotel lobby is full of people. I'll head down there now." What happened next proved just how far Madison had fallen from the daughter I thought I knew. Instead of confronting me in the lobby like rational criminals, they broke into my hotel room while I was downstairs. When I returned with Agent Kellerman and 2 Albany police officers, we found them rifling through my belongings, looking for the evidence they thought I was hiding. Vincent Morrison was holding my laptop, trying to access my files. Madison was going through my purse. The younger man was searching the bathroom. "Police!" Agent Kellerman shouted. "Hands where I can see them!" Madison's face when she saw me standing behind the FBI agent was something I'll never forget. Pure rage mixed with disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend that her elderly mother had outmaneuvered her so completely. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "You're making a huge mistake. Family protects family." "You're absolutely right," I replied. "Family does protect family. That's why I'm protecting myself from you." Vincent Morrison tried to run and made it exactly 3 steps before one of the police officers tackled him. The younger man surrendered immediately, probably calculating that cooperating might reduce his sentence. Madison just stood there, staring at me with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. "You'll regret this," she said, as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "You'll die alone and forgotten, and no one will care." I watched my only daughter being led away in custody for conspiracy, breaking and entering, and attempted elder abuse, and felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in months, I was finally safe from the person who was supposed to love me most. The Albany County Courthouse was surprisingly busy for a Tuesday morning. I sat in the witness waiting room, reviewing my testimony notes while listening to Janet Murphy explain what would happen during Madison and Derek's arraignment. "The prosecutor is confident about the charges," Janet said. "With Dr. Patterson's confession, the audio recording, and all the financial evidence, this is about as solid a case as you can get." "What about Vincent Morrison and his friend?" "Vincent is facing federal charges for the interstate fraud scheme. His friend turned out to be a repeat offender named Marcus Webb, who's already negotiating a plea deal in exchange for testifying against the others." I looked through the window at the crowd of reporters gathering outside. Word had leaked about the case, and apparently the story of a grandmother fighting back against her own daughter was generating national interest. "Mrs. Whitman?" A young prosecutor approached me. "I'm Assistant District Attorney Rachel Chen. Are you ready to give your statement?" Rachel Chen. I wondered if she was related to Derek, then realized I was probably being paranoid. Chen was a common surname, and Derek Morrison wasn't actually Chinese anyway. "I'm ready," I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. The courtroom was packed. I saw Madison sitting at the defense table with an expensive lawyer her insurance fraud money had apparently purchased. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. Derek sat at a separate table with a public defender, which told me everything I needed to know about how quickly his resources had vanished once his scheme collapsed. He wouldn't meet my eyes. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand with my back straight and my voice steady. At 72, I'd survived raising a difficult daughter, burying a beloved husband, and discovering that my own family saw me as nothing more than a bank account to be raided. I wasn't going to be intimidated by a courtroom. "Mrs. Whitman," ADA Chen began, "can you tell the court how you first became suspicious of the defendants?" I spent the next hour laying out the entire story. The timeline of Derek's appearance in Madison's life, the private investigator's discovery of his criminal background, the recordings of their conversations about manipulating me, the fake medical evaluation, and Derek's assault. Madison's lawyer tried to discredit my testimony, focusing on my age and the brain injury I'd suffered. "Mrs. Whitman, isn't it possible that your memory of these events has been affected by your recent trauma?" "My memory is fine," I said clearly. "But even if it wasn't, I have documentation of everything. Audio recordings, financial records, surveillance photographs, witness statements. My memory is just one piece of evidence." "But you admit you suffered a significant head injury?" "Yes, when Derek Morrison hit me with a paperweight because I caught them planning to steal my money." The lawyer winced. Leading a witness into repeating the key allegation wasn't particularly smart, but Madison hadn't exactly hired the cream of the crop. Derek's public defender was smarter, focusing on the idea that Derek had been manipulated by Madison rather than the other way around. "Mrs. Whitman, isn't it possible that my client was drawn into this scheme by Ms. Whitman rather than being its architect?" I looked at Derek directly for the first time that day. He was trying to look remorseful, probably hoping for a lighter sentence. "Mr. Morrison has 17 previous victims," I said. "This wasn't his first time targeting elderly women through their families. Madison was his partner, not his victim." When the prosecutor played the audio recording of Derek attacking me, the courtroom went completely silent. You could hear the paperweight striking my head, my cry of pain, and Madison's voice immediately afterward, not asking if I was hurt, but demanding to know if Derek had killed me. Several people in the gallery audibly gasped when Madison's voice came through the speakers, cold and calculating. "Did you kill her? Because if she's dead, We need to get our story straight before we call 911. Madison's lawyer objected to the recording, claiming it was illegally obtained, but the judge ruled it admissible since I had been recording the conversation legally when Derek assaulted me. During a recess, I stepped outside for air and found myself face to face with the one person I hadn't expected to see. Tom, Madison's ex-husband, was standing by the courthouse steps, looking older and more tired than I remembered. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "I heard about what happened. I had to come." "Tom, you didn't need to." "Yes, I did." His voice was firm. "I should have warned you years ago about what Madison was becoming, about what she did to our marriage, our finances, our life together." I studied his face, seeing something I'd missed during their divorce proceedings. Not just anger at Madison's behavior, but genuine sorrow about what she'd become. "What did she do to you, Tom?" He smiled bitterly. "The same thing she tried to do to you, just on a smaller scale. She spent our savings, maxed out credit cards, took out loans against my business. When I found out and confronted her, she claimed I was financially abusing her by trying to control her money. Why didn't you tell me this during the divorce?" "Because she's your daughter, and I didn't want to hurt you more than necessary. I thought maybe being away from me would help her find her way back to being the person she used to be." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the reporters interview random passers-by about elder abuse and family betrayal. "Tom," I said finally, "she wasn't always like this, was she? I keep trying to remember when she changed, when she became someone who could do this to her own mother." He considered the question carefully. "I think the person she became was always there, underneath. The charm, the manipulation, the sense of entitlement. Maybe losing you as a safety net brought it all to the surface." When court reconvened, the judge set bail at $5 million each for Madison and Derek, effectively ensuring they'd remain in custody until trial. As the bailiff led them away, Madison turned to look at me one last time. "I'll never forgive you for this," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent courtroom. "I know," I replied. "I'm counting on it." Because forgiveness from someone who saw me as an obstacle to their inheritance was never something I wanted anyway. Outside the courthouse, Ada Chen approached me with news that would make the next phase of this nightmare even more interesting. "Mrs. Whitman, we've discovered something else about Derek Morrison. He's been running this exact same scheme in 3 other states, targeting elderly parents through their adult children. The FBI wants to coordinate prosecution to ensure he gets the maximum possible sentence." "How many families has he destroyed?" "We're still investigating, but preliminary numbers suggest at least 35 victims over the past 15 years, totaling more than $60 million in stolen assets." I thought about those other families, other mothers and fathers betrayed by their own children, other elderly people who died in poverty because their families had stolen their security. "What do you need from me? Would you be willing to testify in the federal case? Your evidence and testimony could help ensure Derek gets life in prison instead of 20 to 30 years. I looked back at the courthouse where my daughter was being held, awaiting trial for trying to steal my life savings and destroy my mental capacity for money. "Absolutely," I said. "Let's make sure he never gets another chance to do this to anyone." The federal case against Derek Morrison was scheduled to begin 6 weeks after the state charges, which gave me time to prepare for something I'd been dreading, going through Madison's apartment to understand how deep her involvement really ran. Agent Kellerman had obtained a search warrant, and she'd asked me to accompany the FBI team to identify any items that belonged to me or might be relevant to the financial crimes. What we found was worse than I'd imagined. Madison's dining room table had been converted into a command center for targeting elderly victims. Charts showing the net worth of various families, detailed profiles of potential marks, and photographs of Derek with different women, all of whom appeared to be in their 40s and 50s, all of whom had recently divorced wealthy men or lost wealthy spouses. "Eleanor," Agent Kellerman said, pointing to a whiteboard covered in notes. "Look at this." The whiteboard contained a timeline of their operation against me, but it went back further than I'd realized. They'd been planning this for over a year, since before Madison's divorce from Tom was even finalized. Phase 1. Establish financial need through divorce, I read aloud. Phase 2. Move closer to target, rebuild relationship. Phase 3. Introduce romantic partner with financial expertise. Phase 4. Gain access to financial information. Phase 5. Obtain power of attorney through medical intervention if necessary. Medical intervention if necessary. They'd been planning to have me declared incompetent from the very beginning. There's more, Agent Kellerman said, opening a folder marked Contingency Plans. The contingency plans were detailed instructions for what to do if I became suspicious, if I hired a lawyer, if I involved law enforcement, or if I simply refused to cooperate. They ranged from identity theft and forgery to more serious options that made my blood run cold. Plan C. Staged accident while target is alone, I read. Plan D. Medical emergency requiring immediate power of attorney transfer. They'd been prepared to kill me if I didn't cooperate with being robbed. But the most disturbing discovery was in Madison's bedroom closet, a box containing letters and photographs from Derek's previous victims. Elderly men and women who'd died in poverty, families destroyed by his schemes, children who'd lost their inheritance because their parents had fallen for Derek's manipulations. Madison had kept them like trophies. One letter particularly caught my attention. It was from a woman named Dorothy Chen in California, whose daughter had helped Derek steal her entire retirement savings. "My dear anyone who finds this," the letter began, "I am writing to warn you about a man named Derek Morrison and the women who help him target elderly parents. My daughter Jessica told me Derek was a financial advisor who could help me invest my husband's life insurance money. Instead, they stole everything I had. I died alone in a charity nursing home while Jessica and Derek spent my money on luxury cars and vacations in Europe. Please don't let this happen to you." Dorothy Chen had died 3 years ago, according to the death certificate also in Madison's box. Her daughter Jessica had used Derek's scheme to steal $4 million, and Madison had kept Dorothy's final letter as a souvenir. That night, I sat in my hotel room reading through more letters from Derek's victims, and I made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to use my inheritance to help them. Not the families that had been complicit in the thefts, like Madison, but the elderly victims who'd died in poverty, and the innocent family members who'd lost their inheritance because one relative had chosen to partner with a criminal. Dorothy Chen's grandson had written to the FBI, explaining that his grandmother's theft had ruined his college plans and forced his family into financial hardship. There were others like him, children and grandchildren who'd been victimized twice, first by Derek's scheme and then by their own relatives' participation. I called my attorney the next morning. "I want to establish a foundation," I told Margaret Chen, who was not, I'd confirmed, related to Derek or Dorothy Chen, to help families recover from elder financial abuse. "Eleanor, that's a wonderful idea, but are you sure this is the right time? You're still dealing with the criminal case?" "Margaret, this is exactly the right time. Madison thinks she's going to inherit my money when this is all over. I want her to learn at her sentencing that every dollar she tried to steal is already gone." The foundation paperwork took 3 weeks to complete. I donated $28 million, almost everything Frank had left me, to create an endowment that would help elderly abuse victims and their families recover stolen assets, pay for legal representation, and access counseling services. I kept just enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, plus $1 million for a very special purpose that Madison would learn about at the worst possible moment. The federal trial began on a Tuesday in October. Derek was facing charges in connection with 38 separate cases of elder financial abuse across 6 states. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case, with victim testimony, financial records, and recorded conversations that painted a picture of a career criminal who'd built his entire life around destroying elderly people's security. I testified for 3 hours, walking the jury through Derek's scheme, Madison's role as his accomplice, and the systematic way they'd planned to steal my inheritance and destroy my mental capacity. Derek's lawyer tried the same strategy Madison's attorney had used, claiming that Derek was reformed, that he'd been influenced by criminal partners, that his difficult childhood explained his behavior. The federal prosecutor, a woman named Lisa Rodriguez, demolished those arguments with surgical precision. "Mr. Morrison," she said during cross-examination, "you've had 38 elderly victims over 15 years. Can you explain how your difficult childhood forced Mrs. Eleanor Whitman's daughter to help you plan her mother's financial exploitation?" Derek's answer was barely audible. "It didn't. Can you explain how your difficult childhood forced you to attack Mrs. Whitman with a paperweight when she discovered your crimes? It didn't. Can you explain how your difficult childhood forced you to keep letters from victims who died in poverty as souvenirs of your successful thefts? Derek's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The jury had already seen the box of letters, already heard the recordings, already learned about the systematic destruction Derek had brought to dozens of families. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction or revenge, but sadness for all the time and energy that had been wasted on this man's crimes. Derek Morrison was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. He would die in custody, which meant he would never hurt another family. Madison's state trial was scheduled for the following month, and it would be much more personal. Because Madison wasn't just a criminal, she was my daughter. And despite everything she'd done, watching her face the consequences of her choices was going to be the hardest part of this entire ordeal. But it was also going to be the most important. The night before Madison's trial, I did something I hadn't done in months. I looked through old photo albums, trying to find the exact moment my daughter had transformed from the person I thought I knew into someone who could plan her own mother's destruction for money. Madison, at age 5, gap-toothed and grinning, holding the first-place ribbon from her school science fair. Madison at 16, valedictorian of her high school class, full of promise and ambition. Madison at 25, walking down the aisle to marry Tom, beautiful and hopeful about their future together. When had she become someone who could keep letters from elderly victims as trophies? My phone rang, interrupting my trip down memory lane. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Whitman? This is Dr. Patricia Morales from the Albany County Jail. I'm the psychological evaluator assigned to your daughter's case. Is Madison all right? Physically, yes. Mentally. That's why I'm calling. Madison has requested to speak with you before her trial tomorrow. She claims she has information about Derek's operation that could help other victims. I almost laughed. Even facing prison time, Madison was still trying to manipulate people. Dr. Morales, what's your professional opinion about my daughter's request? Honestly, I think she's desperate and looking for any way to reduce her sentence. But Mrs. Whitman, there's something else. During our evaluation sessions, Madison has shown no genuine remorse for what she did to you. No empathy for how her actions affected you. She continues to believe that your money should have been hers by right, and that you were selfish for not voluntarily giving it to her. I see. What's more concerning is that she's been asking detailed questions about your current living situation, your security arrangements, your daily routines, questions that have no bearing on her legal case. A chill ran down my spine. Are you saying she might still be planning something? I'm saying that Madison continues to see you as an obstacle to what she wants, not as her victim. If she gets any opportunity to contact you or influence your life, I believe she'll take it. The next morning, I sat in the courtroom watching my daughter's trial begin, knowing that the woman at the defense table was not just a criminal, but someone who might still be planning to hurt me if given the chance. Madison had hired a new lawyer, apparently with money from a source the prosecution was still investigating. Her new strategy was simple: blame everything on Derek while portraying herself as another victim of his manipulation. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, her lawyer began, my client is not a criminal mastermind. She's a vulnerable woman who was exploited by a professional con artist who targeted her family. Derek Morrison identified Madison Whitman as someone who could provide access to her elderly mother, and he systematically manipulated her into participating in a scheme she never fully understood. It was a good strategy, and it might have worked if the prosecution didn't have recordings of Madison's voice, making it clear that she understood exactly what they were planning. When Ada Chen played the recording of Madison discussing Dr. Patterson's willingness to falsify medical records, the defense's victim narrative crumbled. So, if the old lady fights the incompetency ruling, Madison's voice echoed through the courtroom. Dr. Patterson can claim her resistance proves she's paranoid and delusional? Exactly, Derek's voice replied. The more she protests, the crazier she looks. Madison's laugh was clearly audible on the recording. Perfect. Mom's always been stubborn. She'll definitely protest, which will just make Patterson's evaluation more convincing. The jury's faces showed exactly what they thought of a daughter who found her mother's stubbornness useful for stealing her inheritance. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source: Marcus Webb, the man who'd been with Madison and Vincent Morrison when they broke into my hotel room. Marcus had negotiated a plea deal in exchange for complete cooperation, and his testimony revealed details about Madison's involvement that even I hadn't known. Madison Whitman hired me to follow her mother, Marcus testified. She wanted to know Mrs. Whitman's daily routines, where she went, who she talked to, when she was alone. She paid me $3,000 for 2 weeks of surveillance. What was the purpose of this surveillance? Ada Chen asked. Madison said they might need to neutralize her mother if she became too suspicious about their financial planning. The word neutralize hung in the air like a death threat. Did Madison explain what neutralize meant? She said it could mean anything from identity theft to make her mother look incompetent, to staging an accident that would either kill her or put her in a coma where Madison could control her medical decisions. I gripped the arms of my chair, realizing how close I'd come to something much worse than financial theft. Madison hadn't just been planning to steal my money. She'd been planning to eliminate me entirely if I got in the way. During cross-examination, Madison's lawyer tried to discredit Marcus as a career criminal whose testimony couldn't be trusted. Mr. Webb, you've been convicted of assault, theft, and fraud. Why should the jury believe anything you say? Marcus looked directly at Madison before answering. Because I might be a criminal, but I've never planned to hurt my own mother for money. Even I have limits. When Madison took the stand in her own defense, I saw a performance that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so disturbing. She cried at all the right moments. She expressed regret for allowing Derek to influence her judgment. She claimed that fear of Derek's violence had prevented her from protecting me when he attacked me. I was terrified, she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Derek had threatened to hurt me if I didn't cooperate. When he hit my mother, I was too shocked and frightened to react. I've regretted that moment every day since. It was a masterful performance. And for a moment, I almost believed her myself. Then Ada Chen began her cross-examination. Ms. Whitman, you testified that you were afraid of Derek Morrison. Is that correct? Yes, absolutely. Yet phone records show that after Derek attacked your mother and she was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, you called Derek 17 times that first night. Were those calls to express your horror at his violence? Madison hesitated. I was confused and upset. Actually, we have transcripts of those calls, obtained through a federal wiretap. Would you like me to read them to the jury? Madison's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed the transcripts as evidence. Here's what you said to Derek Morrison while your mother was fighting for her life in the ICU, Ada Chen read. Quote, "We need to stick to the story that she fell during a medical episode. If she dies, we're clear. If she wakes up with memory problems, we can still get the incompetency ruling. Either way, we can make this work." End quote. The courtroom was dead silent. Does that sound like the words of a woman who was horrified by violence against her mother? Madison's mask finally slipped completely. My mother was standing in the way of my inheritance. She was old, sick, and selfish. That money should have been mine. Her lawyer was frantically trying to get her to stop talking, but 47 years of entitlement and rage were pouring out. I worked my entire life waiting for my inheritance, planning my future around it, and she was going to waste it on gardening and charity donations. $30 million that could have secured my future, and she would have squandered it on bird feeders and donations to help other people. So you decided to take it by force? Ada Chen asked. I decided to take what was rightfully mine before she could give it away to strangers. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, assault in the second degree, and attempted theft of more than $1 million. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following week, and Madison was remanded back to custody. As the bailiff led her away, she looked at me with pure hatred and said 5 words that told me Dr. Morales had been right to be concerned. This isn't over between us. Madison's sentencing hearing was scheduled for the same week the Eleanor Whitman Foundation officially opened its doors to help elder abuse victims and their families. The timing wasn't coincidental. I wanted my daughter to learn about the foundation at the exact moment she learned how long she'd be spending in prison for trying to steal the money that was already gone. Judge Patricia Sullivan had a reputation for harsh sentences in elder abuse cases, having lost her own father to a financial exploitation scheme years earlier. Madison's lawyer had tried unsuccessfully to get the case transferred to a different judge. The courtroom was packed with victims of Derek's schemes and their families, people whose lives had been destroyed by the criminal enterprise Madison had willingly joined. I sat in the front row, wearing the navy blue dress Frank had always said made me look distinguished, preparing to read a victim impact statement that had taken me weeks to write. Your Honor, Ada Chen began, the prosecution recommends the maximum sentence under state guidelines. The defendant showed no remorse for her crimes, no empathy for her victim, and continued attempts to manipulate the system even after her conviction. She represents a continued danger to elderly people and their families. Madison's lawyer, clearly working with limited material, focused on her lack of prior convictions and claimed she'd been influenced by Derek's manipulation. Your Honor, my client was a victim of psychological manipulation by a career criminal. She's learned from her mistakes and poses no future threat to society. Judge Sullivan looked skeptical. Counselor, your client testified under oath that she believed the victim's money rightfully belonged to her. She expressed no remorse for planning her mother's financial exploitation and potential physical harm. On what basis do you claim she poses no future threat? The lawyer had no good answer for that. Then it was my turn to speak. I walked to the podium and looked directly at Madison for the first time since her conviction. She stared back with defiant hatred, still believing she was the victim in this situation. Your Honor, my name is Eleanor Whitman, and I'm here to tell you about the daughter I raised and the stranger who tried to destroy me for money. I spent 10 minutes describing the Madison I remembered. Bright, accomplished, full of promise. Then I described the woman who'd partnered with a career criminal to steal my life savings, destroy my mental capacity, and potentially kill me if I resisted. The most painful part of this experience wasn't the financial loss or even the physical attack. It was realizing that my own daughter saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to her inheritance. She was willing to have me declared mentally incompetent, institutionalized against my will, and stripped of every right and dignity I'd earned over 72 years of life. I paused, looking at Madison's face, seeing no trace of the little girl who'd once run to me when she was frightened. But Madison made one crucial mistake. She assumed that because I'm elderly, I'm helpless. She assumed that because I loved her, I wouldn't protect myself from her. And she assumed that my money would always be there waiting for her to take it. Madison's eyes narrowed. She sensed what was coming. 3 weeks before Derek Morrison attacked me, I donated $28 million to establish the Eleanor Whitman Foundation for Elder Abuse Prevention. Every dollar Madison tried to steal is now being used to help other families recover from crimes exactly like the ones she committed. Madison's face went white. Her lawyer looked like he'd been punched. The foundation has already helped recover stolen assets for 12 families victimized by Derek Morrison's schemes. It's providing legal representation for elderly people fighting financial exploitation. And it's funding research into prevention strategies that will protect other parents from experiencing what I went through. I turned to look directly at Madison. You told me my money should have been yours by right. You were wrong. My money belongs to me, and I chose to use it to make sure no other mother has to face what you put me through. Madison stood up, shaking with rage. You spiteful old witch. That was my inheritance. You had no right. Sit down. Ms. Whitman, Judge Sullivan ordered sharply. But Madison was beyond controlling herself. Years of entitlement and narcissistic fury were exploding in a courtroom full of witnesses. $30 million, she screamed. You gave away $30 million to strangers rather than leave it to your own daughter. What kind of mother does that? The kind of mother whose daughter tried to have her killed for an inheritance, I replied calmly. Judge Sullivan banged her gavel repeatedly. Ms. Whitman, you will sit down immediately or be held in contempt. Madison finally collapsed back into her chair, but the damage was done. Her outburst had shown the court exactly who she really was, someone who believed elderly people existed solely to fund their children's lifestyles. Judge Sullivan's sentence was swift and merciless. Madison Whitman, You have been convicted of elder abuse against your own mother, a crime that strikes at the foundation of family trust and human decency. You plan to steal her life savings, destroy her mental autonomy, and potentially cause her death to achieve your financial goals. The court sentences you to 25 years in state prison without possibility of parole for 15 years. Additionally, you are ordered to pay restitution of $1 million to the Eleanor Whitman Foundation, to be garnished from any future earnings or assets. Madison's scream of rage could be heard throughout the courthouse. As the bailiff led her away in shackles, she looked back at me one last time. "I'll never forgive you for this," she said. "I know," I replied. "I'm counting on it." 6 months later, I received an unexpected letter at my new address in Sarasota, Florida. I'd moved there after the trial, wanting to start fresh somewhere Madison couldn't find me when she eventually got out of prison. The letter was from Dorothy Chen's grandson, the young man whose college plans had been ruined when Derek and his grandmother's daughter stole her retirement money. "Dear Mrs. Whitman," it read, "I wanted you to know that the Eleanor Whitman Foundation paid for my final year of college and helped my family recover most of what was stolen from my grandmother. I'm graduating next month with a degree in criminal justice, and I plan to specialize in elder abuse cases. Your foundation didn't just help us financially, it gave us hope that good people still exist who fight for what's right." I sat on my new porch, overlooking a garden I'd planted with my own hands, reading about a young man whose life had been restored by the money Madison thought she deserved simply for being born. The foundation had helped 43 families in its first 6 months, recovering over $8 million in stolen assets and providing legal representation for dozens of elder abuse cases. The irony was perfect. Madison's greed had created a lasting legacy of justice for exactly the kind of victims she'd helped create. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a familiar name, Agent Sarah Kellerman. "Eleanor, I have news about Derek Morrison. He was found dead in his cell this morning, apparent suicide." I felt no satisfaction at Derek's death, only relief that he'd never hurt another family. "What about Madison?" I asked. "She's been placed in protective custody. Apparently, she's been receiving threats from other inmates who don't appreciate child abusers and elder abusers. Prison isn't kind to people who target the vulnerable." After hanging up, I sat in my garden thinking about justice, revenge, and the difference between the two. I'd wanted Madison to face consequences for her choices, and she had. I'd wanted her to lose the money she'd tried to steal, and she had. I'd wanted to ensure she could never hurt me or anyone else again, and I had. But mostly, I'd wanted to use my remaining years to do something meaningful with the life Frank and I had built together. The foundation was already helping people, already making a difference, already turning the worst experience of my life into something positive. That evening, I called Tom, Madison's ex-husband, who'd become an unexpected friend through this ordeal. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm free," I said simply. "For the first time in years, I'm completely free to live my life without worrying about Madison's schemes or Derek's threats. It's actually quite wonderful. Any regrets?" I thought about that question for a long time. Did I regret having to destroy my own daughter to protect myself? Did I regret giving away most of my inheritance instead of leaving it to family? "No," I said finally. "I regret that Madison became someone who could do what she did, but I don't regret protecting myself from her. And I don't regret making sure that money helps people who deserve it instead of someone who tried to kill me for it." As I hung up the phone and prepared for bed, I realized something that surprised me. I was happy. At 72 years old, after surviving my daughter's betrayal and a criminal conspiracy to steal my life savings, I had found something I'd never expected to find again: peace. Madison had told the court that I would die alone and forgotten, as if that was the worst possible fate she could wish on me. She was wrong about everything, as usual. I wouldn't die alone. I had friends, community, and the families helped by the foundation who wrote to thank me regularly. And I wouldn't be forgotten. The foundation would continue helping elder abuse victims long after I was gone, ensuring that my legacy was protecting other parents from experiencing what Madison had put me through. Madison, on the other hand, would spend the next 15 to 25 years in a prison cell, thinking about the $30 million she'd been so certain belonged to her. Money that was instead building a better world for people who deserved it. Sometimes justice isn't about revenge. It's about making sure that evil choices lead to consequences, and that good choices lead to something better. And sometimes, when your own family betrays you, the family you build from the people whose lives you touch ends up being stronger than the one you lost. That night, I slept better than I had in years, knowing that Eleanor Whitman Foundation would wake up the next morning and help another family rebuild their lives after elder abuse. It was exactly what Frank would have wanted us to do with the fortune we'd built together. And it was exactly what Madison would never understand, even if she lived to be 100. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.